Mia Carter never believed in fairy tales. Love, in her opinion, was just an illusion, something people created to make life feel less lonely. She had seen how love had failed her mother, who spent years waiting for a husband who never came back. She had seen how it had failed her friends, who fell for sweet words only to end up with broken hearts. Mia didn't have time for love. She believed in hard work, in success, in independence. But life had a cruel sense of humor. No matter how hard Mia worked, it wasn't enough to save her father's company from drowning in debt. Carter Enterprises had been her father's pride and joy, a business he had built from the ground up. But bad investments and a failing economy had pushed the company to the edge of bankruptcy. Suppliers demanded payment, investors lost faith, and banks refused to grant another loan. Mia had tried everything, cutting costs, negotiating deals, even considering selling parts of the business. But nothing worked. The company needed a miracle, and miracles didn't come easily. Then, out of nowhere, an offer arrived. A strange, impossible, life-changing offer. Daniel Evans was a man of power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. He owned one of the largest business empires in the country, and everything he touched turned to gold. But despite his success, he had one problem: his grandfather's will. Daniel's grandfather, Henry Evans, had built the Evans Corporation with strict values. Before he passed away, he left a condition in his will. If Daniel didn't marry within 6 months, he would lose his inheritance. The board members would take control, and Daniel would lose everything he had worked for. Daniel didn't believe in love either. To him, marriage was nothing more than a social contract, a business arrangement that often ended in failure. He had no interest in romance, emotions, or relationships, but he wasn't about to let his grandfather's outdated ideas ruin his future. That was when he found Mia Carter. Mia's company needed saving. Daniel needed a wife. It was a perfect deal. When Daniel first proposed the idea, Mia thought it was a joke. "You're asking me to marry you, just for a contract?" she asked, staring at him across the sleek conference table in his office. Daniel leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Yes, 1 year. After that, we go our separate ways. You get the money to save Carter Enterprises, and I get to keep my inheritance. It's a win-win." Mia shook her head, laughing bitterly. "Marriage isn't a business deal, Daniel." "But it can be," he said, his voice calm. "You don't have to love me. You don't even have to like me. We sign the papers, play the role of a happy couple in public, and in private we live our own lives. Once the year is over, you walk away with your father's company still standing. It's just a contract." Mia wanted to refuse. She wanted to believe she could find another way. But deep down, she knew the truth: there was no other way. If she refused, Carter Enterprises would fall apart, and her father's legacy would be destroyed. That night, Mia stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her options. Marrying a stranger, pretending to be a wife to a man she barely knew, felt ridiculous. And yet, if it was just for a year, if it could save everything her father had worked for, was it really such a bad choice? The next morning, she made her decision. She met Daniel at his office again, her heart pounding as she slid the contract across the table. "Fine. I'll marry you." Daniel didn't smile, but there was a glint of approval in his eyes. He picked up a pen, signed his name at the bottom of the document, and then handed the pen to her. Mia hesitated for just a second before signing her name. With that one signature, her life changed forever. A week later, Mia Carter became Mia Evans. The wedding was nothing more than a show, a grand ceremony filled with flashing cameras, expensive decorations, and hundreds of guests who believed in the illusion of love. To the world, they were a perfect couple, a rich, powerful businessman and his beautiful, intelligent bride. But behind the smiles, behind the vows spoken in front of hundreds of people, they both knew the truth. This was not a love story, it was a deal. Nothing more. Or at least, that's what they both thought. Mia Carter Evans never imagined herself living in a penthouse like this. The moment she stepped inside Daniel Evans's home, she felt out of place. It was cold, sleek, and perfect. Like him. The walls were a clean shade of white, the furniture dark and modern, and every room smelled of expensive cologne and polished wood. There were no family photos, no personal touches, nothing that made the place feel like a real home. Just like their marriage, This house was nothing more than a contract, a business arrangement without warmth or emotion. Maya sighed as she set her bag down in the entryway. She had officially moved in. Daniel walked past her, glancing at his watch. Your room is down the hall. Third door on the left. Her room. Not their room. Mia wasn't surprised. From the beginning, they had agreed on clear boundaries. No shared room, no expectations, and no real relationship. Just 1 year of pretending, then they would both walk away. She followed his instructions, stepping into the bedroom he had prepared for her. It was big, bigger than her entire apartment had been, with a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, and a view of the city that stretched for miles. It was beautiful, but it felt lonely. Maya placed her suitcase on the bed and let out a breath. 1 year, she whispered to herself. That's all. Living with the stranger days passed, and life inside the penthouse followed a routine. Mia and Daniel barely spoke. They had breakfast at the same table, but conversations were short, mostly about schedules and appearances. When is the next event? Mia would ask. Friday night, Daniel would reply, barely looking up from his laptop. Their marriage existed only in public. At charity galas, business parties, and family dinners, they played the role of a perfect couple, smiling, holding hands, exchanging loving glances for the cameras. But the moment they stepped back into the penthouse, the act was over. Maya spent most of her time working on her father's company, trying to rebuild what had been lost. She attended meetings, spoke with investors, and made tough decisions. It was exhausting, but at least it kept her mind off the strange life she was living. Daniel, on the other hand, was always busy. He left early, attended meetings, and returned late at night. Mia rarely saw him except during events. But things started to change in small ways. One evening, Mia came home later than usual, completely drained from a long day. As she stepped into the dining area, she was surprised to find the table set with dinner. She frowned. You ordered food. Daniel, who was seated at the head of the table, looked up. I cooked. Mia raised an eyebrow. You can cook. He smirked. I own a billion-dollar company, Mia. I think I can handle a meal. She hesitated but eventually sat down. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she took her first bite. The food was surprisingly good. For the first time since their marriage, they had dinner together without an audience, without pretending. And for the first time, it didn't feel completely uncomfortable. Cracks in the ice. As weeks passed, more unexpected moments like this began to happen. Daniel started bringing her coffee in the mornings, always prepared just the way she liked it. Maya found herself memorizing his schedule without meaning to. They still weren't friends. They were still just two strangers sharing a space. But something was shifting, even if neither of them wanted to admit it. One night, Mia was working late in the living room, reviewing documents for Carter Enterprises. She didn't notice Daniel watching her from across the room. You should get some rest, he finally said. Mia looked up, startled. I have a deadline. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You work too much. She let out a short laugh. Look who's talking. Daniel smirked but didn't argue. Instead, he walked over and closed her laptop. That's enough for tonight. Mia opened her mouth to protest but stopped. There was something in his expression, something softer, something different. She sighed. Fine. Just this once. She expected him to walk away after that, to return to his own world, just like always. But instead, he sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was new, unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. Maybe living with Daniel Evans wasn't going to be as unbearable as she had thought. A marriage that wasn't just business. Despite the growing changes between them, Mia kept reminding herself that this wasn't real. She and Daniel were still strangers, still bound by a contract. They weren't husband and wife in the real sense, just two people playing a role for the world. But sometimes when she caught him looking at her a second too long, or when he brushed his hand against hers in passing, she wondered, what if this wasn't just an act anymore? Mia and Daniel continued their routine, living in the same house but maintaining their distance. Their marriage existed in public, where they played the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, they remained strangers. However, something was shifting between them, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeably. It began with small things. Mia would find her morning coffee already made, just the way she liked it, sitting on the kitchen counter before she even stepped in. At first, she thought the housekeeper had done it, but then she noticed Daniel sipping his own coffee at the table, acting as if it were nothing. Then there were the moments at public events, the way Daniel's hand lingered on her waist a little longer than necessary, the way he guided her through the crowd with an ease that didn't feel forced, the way he whispered small compliments, not loud enough for others to hear, but just enough to make her heartbeat quicken. One night, they attended a gala for one of Daniel's business partners. The event was grand, filled with powerful people, expensive gowns, and sparkling chandeliers. Maya played her role perfectly, smiling at guests, holding onto Daniel's arm, laughing at just the right moments. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel leaned in and whispered into her ear, "You look beautiful tonight." It was unexpected. Maya turned to him, but his face was unreadable. He had said it so casually, as if it was just another part of their act, but something about the way his voice sounded, low and sincere, made her feel different. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Later that night, after they returned home, Mia found herself thinking about his words more than she should have. She reminded herself that this was just a contract. Compliments were just another part of the illusion, but then why did her heart react like this? The next day, something else happened that shook her thoughts further. Maya returned home late from work, exhausted. She had spent hours in meetings, trying to fix the financial damage to Carter Enterprises, and her head was pounding. She barely noticed Daniel sitting on the couch, reading through documents. "You're home late," he remarked without looking up. Maya kicked off her heels, sighing. It was a long day. "Did you eat?" She frowned, surprised by the question. "I wasn't hungry." Daniel sighed and stood up. "Wait here." Before she could ask what he was doing, he disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a plate of food and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. Mia stared at the plate, then at him. "You didn't have to." "Just eat, Mia," he interrupted, sitting back down and picking up his papers again. She hesitated for a moment before finally giving in. The food was warm, comforting. As she ate, she stole a glance at Daniel, who was pretending to focus on his work, but hadn't turned a page in several minutes. Something had changed. She just didn't know what. Days passed, and things continued shifting between them. They were no longer just two people sharing a space. There was something unspoken, something in the way they moved around each other, in the way their eyes met and lingered for just a second longer than before. Then, one evening, everything changed again. Mia was sitting in the living room when she heard voices near the entrance. Curious, she walked toward the hallway and saw Daniel speaking with a woman. She was tall, elegant, and undeniably beautiful, dressed in a sleek designer dress. Mia didn't recognize her, but something about the way she touched Daniel's arm, the way she smiled at him, made something burn inside her. Jealousy. It hit her before she even realized it. Daniel's eyes flickered toward Mia, and the corner of his lips lifted into a smirk. "Are you jealous, Mia?" She rolled her eyes, forcing herself to look indifferent. "I don't care who you talk to." He took a step closer, tilting his head slightly. Liar. Mia clenched her jaw. Why was he teasing her? Why was he acting as if this mattered? This was just a contract, just an arrangement, but she couldn't shake the feeling in her chest. That night, as she lay in bed, she found herself thinking about Daniel more than she wanted to. The way he smirked, the way he had leaned toward her as if daring her to admit what she was feeling. She hated it. Because she didn't know what she was feeling anymore. And for the first time since signing the contract, she was afraid. Afraid that this wasn't just an act anymore. Mia tried to ignore the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. Jealousy. It was ridiculous. She had no right to feel this way, no reason to care about Daniel's interactions with other women. This was a contract marriage, nothing more. She reminded herself of that fact over and over again, yet the memory of that woman's hand on Daniel's arm, the way he had smirked at her, refused to leave her mind. Determined to shake it off, Mia focused on work. Carter Enterprises was slowly recovering, thanks to Daniel's financial support and her relentless efforts. But no matter how much time she spent in meetings, reviewing reports, or negotiating deals, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. Their interactions had changed. She felt it in the way he looked at her, in the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't noticing. He was teasing her more, saying things that made her heart race even when she tried to act indifferent. And worst of all, she was starting to look forward to seeing him. One evening, after a long day, she returned home to find Daniel sitting in the living room with a glass of whiskey. He looked relaxed, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. "Long day?" he asked as she kicked off her heels. Maya sighed. "Exhausting." He gestured toward the couch beside him. "Come sit." She hesitated for a second before giving in, sinking into the soft cushions. Daniel handed her a glass of wine. "You need to stop working so hard," she scoffed. "Says the man who practically lives in his office." He chuckled. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both sipping their drinks. It was moments like these that confused Mia the most. She had expected their marriage to be cold, distant. But instead it felt natural. After a while, Daniel spoke again, his voice softer this time. "About the other night, when you saw me with Sophia." Maya stiffened at the mention of the woman. "What about it?" He smirked. "You were jealous." She rolled her eyes, looking away. "I wasn't." Daniel leaned closer, his voice teasing. "Liar." Mia turned to glare at him, but the moment their eyes met, something shifted. He wasn't smirking anymore. His gaze had darkened, his expression unreadable. Her heart pounded. "Mia," his voice was barely above a whisper. She should have pulled away. She should have reminded herself that this was all just an act, just a business deal. But she didn't. She stayed frozen as Daniel reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand what was happening between them, but in that moment she didn't care. Then, as if realizing something, Daniel pulled back, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest." Mia exhaled shakily, nodding. "Yeah, good night." She walked away quickly, shutting her bedroom door behind her. But no matter how much she tried to sleep, her mind kept replaying that moment over and over again. The next day, the weather took a dramatic turn. The city was hit with a heavy storm, rain pouring endlessly, thunder rumbling in the distance. Mia had been stuck in meetings all day and barely had time to check her phone. It was only when she finally left the office late in the evening that she realized she had forgotten her umbrella. By the time she stepped out of the building, the rain was coming down in sheets. She sighed, about to make a run for it when she spotted a familiar car parked at the curb. Daniel. He was leaning against the car, an umbrella in hand, watching her with an amused expression. "Need a ride?" Mia blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "You always forget your umbrella." She narrowed her eyes. "Have you been spying on me?" He smirked. "No. I just pay attention." Mia hesitated before finally walking toward him. But just as she reached him, a strong gust of wind blew, making the rain hit them from the side. With a curse, Daniel pulled her under the umbrella, closer to him, too close. Her breath hitched as she looked up at him. The rain poured around them, the sound drowning out everything else. Daniel was looking at her, really looking at her, as if trying to figure something out. Then, before she could process what was happening, he leaned in. It was slow, almost hesitant, as if he was giving her a chance to pull away, but she didn't. The moment his lips met hers, everything else disappeared. The rain, the cold, the contract, all of it melted away. His kiss was warm, intense, and unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just for show, not for the cameras or the public. It was real. And that terrified her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Daniel searched her face, as if waiting for her to say something. Maya swallowed hard, stepping back. I should go inside." Daniel didn't stop her. He simply watched as she turned and walked toward the penthouse, her heart pounding with every step. Mia lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. No matter how hard she tried to push it out of her mind, her thoughts kept returning to that moment in the rain. The kiss that changed everything. It wasn't supposed to happen. They had rules, boundaries. This was just a contract, a business deal to protect both of their interests. Feelings were never part of the arrangement. Yet when Daniel kissed her, it wasn't for show. There were no cameras, no reporters, no reason to pretend. It was real. And that terrified her. She tossed and turned, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The way his hand had cradled her face, the way he had looked at her afterward, as if he wasn't sure what had just happened either. What did it mean? And more importantly, what did she want it to mean? The next morning, Mia expected things to be awkward between them, but Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He greeted her with his usual calm demeanor, sipping his coffee and reading the newspaper like he did every morning. For some reason that annoyed her. She sat across from him at the dining table, watching him carefully. If the kiss had affected him at all, he wasn't showing it. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "About last night," she started. Daniel glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "What about it?" Mia hesitated. She wasn't even sure what she wanted to say. Did she want an explanation? Did she want him to admit that it meant something? But before she could respond, Daniel smirked. "Was it your first kiss?" Her irritation flared. "Of course not." "Then why do you look so flustered?" he teased, taking a sip of his coffee. Maya scowled. "I am not flustered." His smirk deepened. "Whatever you say, wife." Her face heated at the way he said it, but she quickly covered her reaction by focusing on her breakfast. If he wanted to pretend like nothing had happened, fine. She wasn't going to be the only one losing sleep over this. Over the next few days, Mia tried to act normal, but it wasn't easy. Daniel was still the same, teasing, confident, impossible to read. But every time their eyes met, every time he brushed past her, she felt the tension between them growing stronger. One evening, Mia was working late in her office when she heard a knock on the door. She looked up to find Daniel standing there, his usual smirk replaced by something more serious. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "You didn't come home," he said simply. Maya frowned, checking the time. It was late, but she hadn't expected him to notice. "I had work." Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You always have work." She sighed. "What do you want, Daniel?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around her office, glancing at the stacks of papers on her desk. "You work too much," he finally said. She let out a short laugh. "That's funny, coming from you." Daniel smirked but didn't argue. Instead, he reached out and took her wrist, pulling her to her feet. Mia blinked in surprise. "What are you doing?" "We're leaving," he said simply. She frowned. "Leaving where?" "You'll see." Before she could protest, he guided her out of the office and into his car. She was too stunned to argue, and before she knew it, they were driving through the city. After a while, she realized where they were heading: the beach. It was late, and the shore was quiet except for the sound of the waves crashing against the sand. The city lights shimmered in the distance, reflecting on the water. Maya turned to Daniel, confused. "Why did you bring me here?" He leaned against the car, looking out at the ocean. "Because you needed a break." She sighed, crossing her arms. "You didn't have to kidnap me for that." He chuckled. "You wouldn't have come if I asked." She opened her mouth to argue but realized he was right. For a while they just stood there, listening to the waves. The air was cool, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and freedom. It was peaceful in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You're always so focused on proving yourself, Mia. But you don't have to do everything alone." She turned to him, startled by his words. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes, something real. Her heart pounded. "I don't know what this is between us," he admitted, his voice low. "But I do know that I don't want to pretend anymore." Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was real. No more contracts, no more pretending. She had a choice. She could walk away, keep her walls up, and pretend like nothing had changed. Or she could take a risk. A real risk. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. And for the first time since their marriage began, Mia let herself hope. Mia wasn't sure what came next. She had spent so long convincing herself that her marriage to Daniel was nothing more than a business agreement, a contract they had to uphold for their own benefit. But standing there on the beach, with his fingers laced through hers, everything felt different. Daniel had admitted it. He didn't want to pretend anymore, and deep down she knew she didn't either. The waves crashed softly in the background as they stood in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Mia had never been good at letting people in, at allowing herself to be vulnerable. But something about Daniel, about the way he was looking at her right now, made her feel safe. Finally, she found her voice. "I don't know how to do this." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Do what?" She exhaled slowly, staring at the horizon. "Be in a real marriage." Daniel was quiet for a moment before he spoke. Neither do I. She looked at him in surprise. Daniel always seemed so sure of himself, so confident in everything he did, but now he was admitting that he was just as lost as she was. Mia let out a small, nervous laugh. Well, that's reassuring. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. We'll figure it out. She bit her lip. And if we don't? His gaze softened. Then at least we tried. Mia wasn't sure when she had started trusting him, but in that moment she decided to take the risk. Okay, she whispered. Daniel lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. It was such a small gesture, yet it sent warmth spreading through her chest. When they finally drove back home that night, something had shifted between them. The tension that had once been laced with uncertainty was now filled with something new, possibility. The next few days were different. Mia and Daniel fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. They ate breakfast together without forced conversations. He would leave her coffee on the counter without saying anything, and she would find herself smiling at the small gesture. In the evenings, they sat together in a living room, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes talking about things beyond work and obligations. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were playing roles. One evening, Mia was in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. She wasn't the best cook, but she wanted to try. However, after nearly burning the garlic and spilling sauce everywhere, she groaned in frustration. Daniel walked in just in time to witness the disaster. He leaned against the counter, amusement dancing in his eyes. What exactly are you trying to make? Mia sighed. Pasta, but apparently I'm hopeless. Daniel smirked. Move. She frowned. Excuse me? He rolled up his sleeves. Let me show you how it's done. Mia crossed her arms. And since when do you know how to cook? Daniel shot her a smug look. I wasn't always a billionaire, you know. She watched in surprise as he started working, moving around the kitchen with ease. He chopped vegetables, stirred the sauce, and within minutes, the kitchen smelled amazing. Mia leaned against the counter, watching him in fascination. She had never imagined Daniel, the cold, serious businessman, cooking dinner like this. You're full of surprises, she admitted. He glanced at her with a smirk. I like keeping you on your toes. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the smile that tugged at her lips. That night, as they ate together, Mia realized how much things had changed. This wasn't just a contract anymore. This wasn't just two people pretending. This was real. But just as Mia was starting to let herself believe in this new beginning, reality came crashing back. One afternoon, she received a call that shook everything. It was from a journalist. Mia Carter, we have some information regarding your marriage to Daniel Kingston. Would you like to comment before we release the article? Mia's heart pounded. What are you talking about? The journalist hesitated before continuing. There are rumors that your marriage isn't real, that it was just a contract. Someone has leaked the details. Mia gripped the phone tightly, her breath quickening. Who told you that? I can't reveal our sources, but we'll be publishing the story soon. If you have a statement, now's the time. Maya's mind spun. Who could have leaked this? Very few people knew about the truth of their marriage. And more importantly, what would this mean for her and Daniel? After ending the call, she immediately searched for Daniel, finding him in his home office. We have a problem, she said, her voice urgent. He looked up, frowning. What happened? Maya took a deep breath. Someone told the press about our contract marriage. His expression darkened instantly. Who? I don't know. She ran a hand through her hair. But if this gets out, everything we've built, Carter Enterprises, your company, our reputations, everything will be ruined. Mia had never been afraid of the press before. She had grown up in a world where media scandals and business rumors were common, where a single news article could make or break a company's reputation. But this time it felt different. This time it was personal. She sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone as the rumors about her and Daniel's marriage spread like wildfire. Every major news outlet had picked up the story, speculating about whether their marriage had been nothing more than a business deal. Some sources claimed to have proof, though no concrete evidence had been published yet. Daniel stood near the window, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. We need to get ahead of this, Maya said, her voice firm despite the anxiety swirling inside her. If we let this story control the narrative, it could destroy everything. Daniel turned to her. I've already spoken to my legal team. We're looking into who leaked the information, but until then, we need to decide how we respond. Mia bit her lip. Do we deny it? Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. No, if we outright deny it and someone does have proof, it'll only make things worse. Maya's stomach twisted. Then what do we do? Daniel walked over and sat beside her. He took her hand in his grip steady and reassuring. We tell them the truth. Maya's breath caught. The truth? He nodded. Not the contract part, but the truth as it is now. She looked at him, trying to read his expression. And what is the truth, Daniel? His thumb brushed over her knuckles. That we may have started this marriage for the wrong reasons, but somewhere along the way, it became real. Her heart pounded. He was right. Their marriage had started as an arrangement, a business deal. But now it was something neither of them had expected. Mia exhaled slowly. Are you sure this is the right move? Daniel smiled slightly. For once, I don't care about what's right for business. I care about what's right for us. The words sent a warmth through Mia's chest, and she nodded. Then let's do it. The next morning, Daniel arranged for an exclusive interview with one of the most respected journalists in the city. It wasn't about damage control. It was about setting the record straight on their terms. As they sat in front of the cameras, Mia's pulse quickened. She had faced countless business negotiations, but this felt entirely different. This wasn't about numbers or contracts. This was about them. The journalist, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze, looked at them curiously. There have been rumors that your marriage isn't real, that it was a contract agreement for business benefits. What do you have to say to that? Mia glanced at Daniel before speaking. Our marriage wasn't conventional. We both had reasons to get married that weren't based on love, but somewhere along the way, things changed. Daniel reached for her hand, holding it in his. His voice was steady as he added, what started as a partnership turned into something neither of us expected. What we have now is real. The journalist tilted her head. So, you're saying that while your marriage may have started as a business decision, you're now truly together? Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at Mia. Yes. Mia felt her heartbeat quicken. There was no hesitation in his voice. He wasn't just saying it for the cameras, he meant it. The journalist studied them for a moment before nodding. And what would you say to those who doubt your relationship? Mia took a deep breath and turned to Daniel. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and cupped his face. Then, in front of the entire world, she kissed him. It wasn't for show. It wasn't planned. It was real. Daniel responded instantly, deepening the kiss just enough to leave no doubt about his feelings. When they finally pulled away, there was a stunned silence before the journalist smiled. I think that answers my question. By the next day, the headlines had changed. Instead of rumors about a contract marriage, the media was now filled with stories about a love that had started unexpectedly but had grown into something undeniable. Daniel smirked, wrapping an arm around her waist. You think? She looked up at him. So, what now? He tilted his head. That depends. Do you regret any of this? Mia thought about it. About the contract that had started it all, the arguments, the tension, the unexpected moments that had changed everything. Then she thought about Daniel, how he made her laugh, how he made her feel safe, how he had become the one person she didn't want to imagine her life without. No, she said softly. I don't regret it. Daniel's expression shifted, something warm and tender passing through his eyes. Good, he murmured. Then with a slow smile, he leaned in and kissed her again. This time there were no contracts, no obligations, just love.